In the shadows of one of the busiest highway interchanges in the state of Texas lies one of the most active railroad interlocks in the entire country, as few railroad interlocks in the United States can rival Tower 55. Over 110 trains pound this small section of Fort Worth, Texas every 24 hours on 6 different main lines. Tower 55 hosts 5 different Union Pacific main lines and 1 BNSF line, and also sees traffic from the Fort Worth and Western Railroad, Amtrak's Texas Eagle with passengers between Chicago, San Antonio, and Los Angeles, and also serves as the westernmost terminus for the Trinity Railway Express and the brand new TexRail system. In this video, we will be taking a look at trains on 5 of the 6 different main lines through the famous Tower 55, as well as take a deep dive into the history of the interlock, and even show some past clips of the original interlock during its prime days, along with the final years before the Union Pacific, Southern Pacific, and Burlington Northern Santa Fe mergers in the 1990s. This is Tower 55 in Fort Worth, Texas, the very first episode of American Railroad Hotspots, proudly presented by the North Texas Rail Productions. It's March 16th, 2021, and we're set up along the side of the Pennsylvania Avenue Bridge in Fort Worth, Texas, just south of the interlock for Tower 55. Our first train of the day would be a northbound empty coal drag from Smithers Lake, Texas, bound for the coal fields of Wyoming. Today's train was led by a BNSF SD70 ACE and a BNSF ES44 AC, with 2 BNSF ES44 AC motors serving as rear train DPU. The train would come to a halt right under the Pennsylvania Avenue Bridge, as they would wait for clearance to proceed through Tower 55. After waiting for roughly 10 minutes, the crew was given an advanced approach signal to proceed north through Tower 55. The train will continue towards the Wichita Falls subconnection and head north towards the Texas Panhandle before continuing on to Wyoming. As the northbound coal empties continue their way up the BNSF Fort Worth subdivision, a southbound loaded Union Pacific ethanol train comes off the Choctaw subdivision and enters the Union Pacific Fort Worth subdivision towards Nay Yard, with 3 Union Pacific GE motors on the point and another GE motor from Union Pacific serving as rear train DPU. The train will stop at Nay for a crew change before continuing on further south towards San Antonio. A few minutes after the empty coal drag cleared the interlock on the BNSF Fort Worth subdivision, a northbound Union Pacific power move with two ES-44ACs out of Ney Yard prepares to take the Southwest Y onto the Dallas subdivision and towards Davidson Yard. Moments later, a westbound autorack train is cleared through the interlock on the Dallas subdivision. Tower 55 in Fort Worth, Texas has a very long and interesting history. The term Tower 55 refers to both the railroad intersection where the north-south and east-west mainline tracks cross to form a steel tic-tac-toe grid, and to the little red brick traffic control building at the intersection. That small plot of railroad real estate has been the hub of train traffic in Fort Worth since the get-go in 1876. By 1885, the north-south tracks of the Santa Fe and Missouri Pacific Railroads crossed the east-west Texas and Pacific track here. The original Tower 55 began operation on September 26, 1904, during the heyday of steam. That first building was located just northeast of the current Tower 55 and was so named because it was the 55th such tower designated by the Texas Railroad Commission. Inside the building was the interlocking plant, which was a complex electromechanical system of levers, rods, and switches that controlled track switches and signals, and was designed to prevent trains from colliding with each other as they moved through the yard. A few minutes after the southbound Ethanol train cleared the interlock, a northbound autorack train turns east onto the Dallas subdivision to head towards Garrett Yard. With multi-train meets being one of the most common sights at the famous Tower 55, we got a perfect showcase of it here. As while this northbound autorack train turned east onto the Dallas sub, a northbound empty BNSF grain train makes its way to a stop under the Pennsylvania Avenue Bridge. After receiving an approach medium signal to proceed further up the line, the northbound BNSF grain train slowly eases out from under the Pennsylvania Avenue Bridge and is ready to proceed through the interlock. The first tower in Texas, Tower 1, began operation in 1903 in Bowie when the Rock Island Main Line was laid south from Oklahoma and crossed the Fort Worth and Denver City tracks. Today, the tower is gone and the crossing carries traffic of the Union Pacific from Fort Worth, Texas to Kansas City by way of Chickasha, Oklahoma and Wichita, Kansas as the Duncan subdivision, and the BNSF between Alliance, Texas and Los Angeles, California by way of Saginaw, Wichita Falls and Amarillo, Texas as the Wichita Falls subdivision. Texas and Pacific's Tower 55 was state-of-the-art in 1904. A man in the tower controlled an intricate system of interlocking levers. The levers, by electricity, triggered the proper switches and signals to route trains safely through the tangle of tracks. Of course, the newfangled system took some getting used to. On the very first night of Tower 55's operation, 2 locomotives derailed and some bawling out transpired as members of train crews, especially the old-timers, tried to learn the complicated new system of signals and whistles. Train technology was slow to change. For half a century, Tower 55's command center was a long console of 128 levers operated by levermen. The third floor of the tower gave levermen a 360-degree view of the yard. They used binoculars to keep watch of oncoming trains through the yard's maze of tracks. Every train that passed through Fort Worth, over 110 a day, some of them up to a mile long, and pulled by 7 engines, passed through the tic-tac-toe intersection of Tower 55. However, by the early 1990s, the tower was computerized, levers gave way to buttons, and the old lever console was given the golden watch of retirement. In 2014, a $100 million construction project to improve movement of rail traffic added a third north-south mainline track, new signals, street closures, and improvements to grade crossings and bridges. The improvements were projected to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 95,000 tons a year and move trains through the intersection roughly 10 miles an hour faster. What was state-of-the-art in the early 20th century and even into the late 20th century is not necessarily state-of-the-art in the early 21st century. Today, trains are tracked by GPS and can even be controlled remotely, something that the old-timers of Fort Worth's first Tower 55 would certainly find baffling. With the interlock clear of rail traffic, we find this northbound manifest on the UP Fort Worth sub rolling out of Ney Yard, passing maintenance of way crews. Moments later, we find this eastbound manifest turning off the Dallas subdivision to head south onto the Fort Worth subdivision and towards Ney Yard. Shortly after the train cleared the Y and into Ney Yard, a westbound manifest is cleared through the Interlock on the Dallas subdivision towards Davidson Yard. This train would soon be met by a northbound yard transfer headed to Davidson as they prepare to take the Southwest Y to turn west onto the Dallas sub. Shown here in a flashback to the early to mid-1990s is a southbound Union Pacific coal train, a northbound Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe grain train, and a southbound Southern Pacific power move. Fast forward back to 2021, we find a southbound loaded BNSF grain train rolling by on the Fort Worth subdivision, destined for the Ferromex interchange at Eagle Pass, Texas. On another note, we find this northbound Union Pacific manifest pulling to a stop under the bridge, with Kansas City Southern Power trailing second out of 4 in the consist. Moments later, we find this southbound manifest rolling by on the BNSF Fort Worth subdivision, with Norfolk Southern SD70 ACC number 1806 trailing second out. On another day, we find this southbound loaded BNSF ethanol train rolling through the interlock with 2 more BNSF GE ES44s up front and 1 more on the rear. A few minutes later, we caught this southbound Union Pacific manifest turning off the Choctaw subdivision to head west into Davidson Yard on the Dallas sub. Highballing over the Interlock on the Dallas subdivision just moments later is this westbound domestic intermodal train. While BNSF sees their own priority intermodal traffic on the Fort Worth sub between Chicago and various destinations in southeastern Texas, most of the intermodal traffic through Tower 55 runs on the UP Dallas sub to and from the LA Basin. A few minutes after the westbound intermodal cleared the Interlock, we find this northbound manifest on the UP Fort Worth sub just coming out of Ney Yard. The train will officially enter the Choctaw subdivision once it crosses the diamonds of the Dallas sub. Just a short while later, we find a northbound empty Union Pacific coal drag on the Fort Worth sub pulling to a stop to allow for westbound traffic on the Dallas sub. Just a few minutes after the northbound coal drag pulled to a stop on the Fort Worth sub, another westbound domestic intermodal train rolls over the Interlock, this time with Union Pacific's Western Pacific Heritage Unit leading the charge. A few minutes after the second westbound domestic intermodal cleared the interlock, we find a southbound loaded BNSF coal train from Wyoming, bound for Smithers Lake, Texas, with an SD70 ACE up front, and a Norfolk Southern ES44 AC trailing third at the head end. Less than 10 minutes later, yet another westbound domestic intermodal runs over the interlock on the Dallas subdivision, who was soon to receive a fresh crew at Davidson Yard on the west side of the city. After the rear of the intermodals cleared the interlock, the northbound coal drag has received a clear signal to proceed north and turn east onto the Dallas sub. Once the empty coal drag is finished turning east onto the Dallas sub, this lowly empty frac sand train prepares to head north onto the Choctaw subdivision and soon turn onto the Duncan sub. Thank you for watching this proud presentation of the North Texas Rail Productions. If you liked this video, please be sure to leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And also feel free to leave a comment on what you would like to see next. And until next time, thanks for watching. This has been Tower 55 in Fort Worth, Texas, the very first episode of American Railroad Hotspots.